Welcome to Serve Nebraska's Budgeting Sessions, Section 1, Part 1 of the budget. We'll be talking about salary and benefits. Section 1 is broken down into two parts. And in order to have these sessions short and specific, we're going to just talk about salary and benefits because there's a lot of specific documentation requirements. There is another session on budgeting the remainder of Session 1, which is called Section 1, Session 2. So again, we are looking at staff salaries and staff benefits for AmeriCorps staff and other partners on the grant. Again, looking at the program operating costs, we're looking at necessary costs to carry out the program's goals and objectives. Here you want to include personnel expenses as well as the associated benefits to support the members to oversee the programs, and looking at both federal and match, what are allowable. This section is extremely important in terms of making sure that you are documenting things correctly, and you must be sure that you have a National Service Criminal History check before any time is charged for the grant. Again, these are very specific background checks, which are called National Service Criminal History checks, which are budgeted under the other. We'll talk about in a different session, but make sure that you have that prior to any time being charged to the grant. Again, looking at the National Service Criminal History checks, want to make sure everybody's aware of this critical requirement because it leads to one of the largest disallowed costs across the country as well as in Nebraska. It's important to make sure that your program follows the requirements both for all of people time, which includes staff and members. Again, make sure that you develop written policies and procedures for your own organization that are clear, that outline the responsibilities of how you will be compliant and who will be responsible. Because this is an area where it crosses the HR, fiscal, and program leads. Again, make sure everybody's knowledgeable about their role and that you have good internal controls to ensure that the proper procedures are followed before any costs are charged to the grant. Again, I cannot stress this enough because it's the largest disallowed cost across the country and Nebraska. Again, if you can make sure if you're a new program that you get this right, you'll be off to a great start. So looking at personnel costs, there is a lot of information contained in the uniform guidance that can be found in 2 CFR 200.430. Again, proper documentation is key for salaries and wages, and it's a vital step in terms of making sure that next to members, it's your second largest cost. So you want to make sure that you document it properly. Again, outlined in the regulations are requirements to document salaries. Be sure to check these regulations and make sure that your organization has written policies and procedures to support the activities of how your organization documents its time. In terms of general standards for documentation of personnel expenses, again, you want to make sure that the records for your organization accurately reflect the work performed. Again, the records must be supported by internal controls to ensure the costs are allowable, accurate, and allocated. Make sure that they're part of your official records of the organization. Be reasonable based on the total activity of what the individual is doing. Encompass all of the activities that person is compensated for. Be supported by written policies and procedures, and support the distribution of the employee's time across various cost objectives. Cost objectives really is just the different federal programs that they're working on. Here is a timesheet, and it's not really important of the specifics of the timesheet in regards to the format. It's the components that you can see that are really important. What you see is for a 2-week period, you can see the individual days that the employee marks their time across each of the rows, across each of the columns. Across the rows, you can see the various programs or functions that employees doing. So in this timesheet example, you can see, for instance, that there's AmeriCorps after school program, which the hours are indicated each day of the week that they work. They're also doing some fundraising and other program related time. Again, if you don't have a detailed timesheet that has the different total breakdown of what hours or percentage of time an individual is spending on each activity, you can check in with Serve Nebraska. They'll have sample forms that you can use. Again, another important component is this includes all of the time the individual works, not just the time on AmeriCorps. And there's an area for the employee and the supervisor's signature. Another great key of this is there's instructions for potentially new employees or people that are not familiar with it in terms of calculating all of your cost, all of your time, and delineating the individual pieces. Again, you don't have to use this specific example. It's more about the components that you want to make sure that you have in your own system that's supported by your own policies and procedures. In terms of benefits, again, there's additional information in the uniform guidance under 2 CFR 200.431. In general, these have to be reasonable for the services rendered, conform to the written policies and procedures of your organization, and meet the requirements of the federal statute. Again, benefits are typically based on vary from company to company, and it's critical to ensure that your benefits meet the uniform guidance. And one of those keys is to ensure that there's a written policy and that they're consistently applied across the organization. Again, that doesn't necessarily have to be consistent across each individual, but it has to be consistent across each type of employees. So you can have different benefits for, let's say, full-time and part-time employees, as long as they're called out in your policies and procedures. Lastly, looking at an overview of the timesheet requirements, because this is such an important piece, I want to make sure that you, again, recall that you must do your National Service Criminal History Check. You also want to make sure that your salaries, wages, and fringe benefits are allowable, that they don't include unallowable activities such as general advertising, public relations, lobbying, or fundraising. That they're consistent with your policies and procedures and applied uniformly across the company, and documented and outlined in written policies and procedures. Again, that they're reasonable, and that would be ordinary and necessary for the operation of the grant, and allocable. That is about spreading individual time across different grants, and you want to be consistent with similar costs, and that you're not shifting costs to federal awards to overcome any deficiencies in your timekeeping.